and without further ado, we'll get started. So, Erica, before we dive into all the content, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Elliot. My name's Erica. I have been in the UX field for over 10 years now. 6 of those years have been with Little Caesars. My background is in video production, and actually, my first job right out of college was at an advertising agency where we did television commercials and radio commercials for Little Caesars. And I actually really enjoyed working with Little Caesars. Our clients, the people that we worked with, were very easy to work with. And what really stuck with me was the brand. And if you're familiar with their commercials, they're a little bit silly, they're a little bit weird. And I thought, hey, that's my personality in a nutshell. This is a match made in heaven. And combined with the fact that I really like pizza, I found myself many years later, after getting some experience at other companies, back at Little Caesars, not as a vendor this time, but with the company. Outside of work, you can usually find me on one of my little mini motorcycles or scooters zipping around. I like to keep it under 150 cc's. Or because I'm based in Michigan and surrounded by some of the most gorgeous lakes, in the summertime when it is nice out, I'm usually out on a boat. And I have cats and dogs, but more interestingly, I have 3 crows that come visit me every single morning on my front porch looking for their breakfast. So this is something that has happened for the past 2 years now. They show up sometimes before my eyes are even open. They're very cool, very cute, but they are very loud. I was asked about some of the things that I care about as a designer and a UX lead. So one of the things is obviously making data-driven design decisions. And I know that's really cliche, but it's really important to me, and it's very important to stakeholders around here. I can't just design something, show it to somebody and say, hey, this looks cute. Can we roll with it? It usually doesn't happen like that. Another thing is making sure that we're aligning our UX decisions with real customer needs. I pride myself on being a good listener and taking human insights into the equation. And the last thing is career development. So when I say career development, I'm not necessarily saying like climbing any ladders, but making sure that self-learning is a priority in my career and also the careers of the people that work with me. So even though I may be qualified for my position right now, doesn't mean I'm always going to stay qualified. So wanting to make sure that, just like a lot of people are on this webinar hoping to learn something, I'm also on these webinars a lot, sometimes with Zeplin, looking to learn something new or looking for some validation that I'm doing things very similar to, how other UX leads are doing them.
hmm hmm Yeah, I think that's a common theme with a lot of like UX designers. There's so much learning out there and so many resources available. So it's really good to stay in touch with that. You mentioned your career development. I am like curious, like I didn't know that you did like a production background and you like or like a video production background, then went into like UX design. That's pretty awesome. And so you've been at Little Caesars for like 6 years now.
Yep.
Is it true that when you joined, like I know like the landscape has changed a lot with retail in general, like online ordering wasn't even in all stores yet. So how did you go from that to like where you are today?
Right. So when we started, I was hired as the sole UX practitioner at the company. And from one UX designer, we're still a small team for sure, but we've added another full-time designer, and then we have another designer that's usually seasonal or temporary type of designer. We also have a UX analyst with our team as well. In addition to that, we have 5 separate product teams, and each team has their individual product owner and then a group of dedicated software developers. So it also, in addition to that, we tend to work with a lot of contract designers and developers as well. So the products that we touch on include but are not limited to the Little Caesars mobile apps, so the iOS and the Android app. And we also work on the website and some non-customer facing projects as well. So they might not be things that customers see, but they might be things that appear in store that employees will see and be using. So when I came into Little Caesars in 2017, they were just starting with the rollout of online order and pizza portal pickup. So I was really lucky to start when I did. I remember coming into the office and there would be like a whiteboard right when you walked in that would say 30 stores are now online. And then the next day I'd come in and say 60 stores are now online. So within a year, online ordering was live in almost all stores. Then in 2020, we partnered with DoorDash, so our customers could also have delivery. And that was a huge project. It took a lot of resources, it took a lot of time. And I remember having a launch party. It was one Friday afternoon. Everybody was celebrating the launch of delivery. We were eating, we were bowling, and that was literally the last time that I saw my coworkers for 2 years because that was the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And we were told to go home, stay home, and we'd be working from home for the foreseeable future. Who knows? And honestly, I don't know what would have happened to our sales if we hadn't had launch um, delivery when we did.
So you guys already
So,
had like that app like planned and ready to build, like
mhm.
just perfect timing, I guess.
The timing was just, it was bananas. I don't know what else
Yeah,
to call it. But yeah, the timing was pretty perfect.
it would have
And
been great. Yeah,
then yeah.
great for everyone else too. They could get Little Caesars when they're stuck at home.
And we did. We used it. We used Little Caesars a lot, delivery a lot. I mean, I was
Mhm.
still in a state where I was, washing my Dorito bags with Clorox wipes before I brought them in the house because it was so scary back then. But just knowing how Little Caesars pizzas were cooked and delivered and everything, I had faith in that process.
So at like what point, like I guess like time wise, do you think like you went from like however many stores were like digitized to like, the point where they all were?
Within a
Wow.
year, it happened. Yep. Yeah, and then 2023, here we are. We have several thousand stores in the U.S., but we've also added Canada and Mexico in the mix
Mhm.
as well. So they also have online ordering and delivery.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was going through the app, I had to select my country. So you guys are getting international now with this. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want to talk like a little more about like the Pizza Portal app.
hmm
That's like obviously the heart of Little Caesar's success now over this time period. And kind of like how you created like the ultimate digital pizza experience. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So the pizza portal is essentially a heated locker where it houses your pizza order. And if anybody is unfamiliar with the process, what happens is a customer places an order either on an app or a website. They're given a 3-digit code. So when they go into the store to pick it up, they can either enter that code on a pin pad or they can use their phone and scan a code or use their watch. We have Apple Watch integration now, so that you can scan a QR code. It unlocks the portal compartment, and you can just take your order and walk out of the store within seconds.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know like it probably changes a little bit of the traditional store experience where you normally would have to interact with like a salesperson, but and this also probably was a big help like even when we were transitioning back from COVID, like a lot less contact, right? Person from people to
Yeah.
other people. Yeah.
Yeah, and customers love it. We get a lot of positive feedback. Customers tell us that they love being able to skip the line. Some
Mhm.
people say they feel like a VIP because if there happens to be a line in the store, they're
Just
kind of
walk right in.
walking past.
Yeah.
Yeah, walking past. It's like fast pass, but you don't have to pay for it. It just is. And, there's a whole group of people that just, they really don't like to have to socialize or
Mhm.
have to speak to somebody behind the counter. They can just pick everything up and they don't have to talk to anybody.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I guess like, like we'll dive into the UX of it all now. I know everyone here, probably mostly designers or developers. So we want to know like how your team actually did it. What does your workflow look like at a high level and what tools are you using and why?
Sure. Well, starting from kind of like when we're kicking off a new feature build, we're gathering requirements, we're trying to create a purpose statement, and we're doing a lot of research and discovery. One of our partners that we use for that is user testing, so we'll get a lot of human insights and discovery that way. From there, we're using either Sketch or Figma. We held on to Sketch for a long time. And that's one of the things that I really love about Zeppelin is whether a team or whether a designer uses Sketch or Figma, both of them integrate with Zeppelin easily.
Right.
Azure DevOps is what we use just kind of for our development task tracking. So some people might be familiar more with Jira. It's pretty much the same thing. And then we use Zeppelin as our source of truth for documentation. And I know I have samples of that, like more in depth a little bit later.
Yeah, yeah. And like you mentioned, I think that's like a big thing. I think I'd be curious, like, if anyone in the chat wants to let us know what design tool you're using. It's interesting. Like, I feel like a lot of big orgs with a lot of different design teams, they've kind of, it's a lot of like moved to Figma, but there's still a decent amount that want to stick with Sketch. And so, I think like that's been something that we've seen a lot more. I know there's been a lot more back and forth now with the new pricing situation going on with Figma. So yeah, like I think, it's interesting that like especially as you spread out, like not everyone's just using one design tool and you kind of have a mix of both.
Mhm.
Yeah. So one thing that we notice a lot when we're working with product teams, it's not just like the design and dev work that's hard, but working with other stakeholders and balancing their need for like alignment, visibility, and approval as well, like PMs and QA. So I know your team has recently been working on like a major menu redesign. We've talked about it before. But where organizational alignment's like kind of like a big challenge. Can you share how your team kind of manages that from like a workflow perspective?
Yeah, I can say that anytime certain screens are touched, especially the menu, for example, it involves a lot more stakeholders than just our digital team and executives from that team. It involves our marketing team, our operations team, our legal, and our C-suite, so executive management as well. And getting all those cooks in the kitchen, so to say, can get a little bit complicated. So, we always want to start out with just the problem definition and why we're doing this and any kind of, data that we can bring to the table that kind of like reinforces why we're making the changes that we're making um, is helpful. We want to define a scope and some technical solutions. And that's where we typically get our product owners involved and they can start writing some user stories. The design team will start working in one of our tools for some design iterations and some options or variants. And from there, we'll do several rounds of approvals. So we'll do design reviews with different teams or the larger team together. It usually happens in different levels. And once one team signs off of it, like operations, yeah, this is not going to be a huge impact on operations approved. Then it goes to the next department. Marketing takes a look at it, making sure that all of our designs meet their brand standards and everything like that, then it, all the way up to executive management. And I know that can take a lot of time.
Hmm.
One of the things I really like about Zeppelin as well is the approvals that are in Zeppelin. So
Right.
we've tried out different tools for approvals as well, like in the past, and none of them have really worked out. I think
Hmm.
because they're just too complicated
Hmm.
where Zeppelin is just like, hey, it's right there, approved, not approved, give me a comment, and it's super easy to use. Um, Handoff and all UX documentation is also in Zeppelin. Our flows are in Zeppelin. QA uses Zeppelin as well, and all the way taking it all the way to a launch.
Yeah, no, you mentioned like how Zeppelin is easy to like onboard for, external stakeholders. I would imagine that, the
Mhm.
benefit is also there for designers who don't have to have people digging through their own Figma files, right? Like a design
Yeah.
file is like never really finished. It's always live. So something that like we kind of think about here at Zeppelin is we like creating that like separate space for like everyone to collaborate in, which makes it easier both for like the stakeholders as well as for designers who don't have people like maybe accidentally touching their designs and stuff like that.
It's like walking into my house. My living
Yeah.
room is always really clean and well put together. That's
Hmm.
Zeppelin. I'm not embarrassed to show it, but if you open the door to my bedroom, that's where I hid everything. And that's
Hmm.
basically Figma.
Right, right. And you wouldn't want to have to clean up everything in your bedroom every
I
single
know. I
time
don't
you have
I don't
people
want to
come.
show
Yeah,
anybody my design
yeah,
files.
yeah. No, that's a really good metaphor, actually. I'm gonna have to start using, we have to steal that one from you, Eric. So let's talk a little bit about like kind of like the product success that you've had at Little Caesars. We touched on like the pizza portal and the app and the success of the app and stuff like that. You've come out with this successful workflow that works for your digital team as well as all of your stakeholders across the business. So we have a lot of folks in the audience probably who have to manage a lot of cross team and stakeholder alignment and can learn from your processes. Can you go over like kind of what's behind like the success of your team?
Yeah, so for us, everything we do is for the customer, and everyone within Little Caesars is united around helping customers order pizza as fast as possible and have a great experience doing that. So, because we're all shooting for the same goal, over time, we've really tailored a lot of our processes to include things that help us get the best quality and the best efficiency as possible. So over in quality, we partner with Baymard Institute, which is like a independent UX research company that really has a lot of e-commerce guidelines. So if you are e-commerce and you have a checkout, whatever you're selling, they usually have best practices there. And some of them don't apply to us, but a lot of them do. So we're making sure that we are kind of auditing our process as much as possible for that. Qualitative and quantitative feedback, constantly doing human insights and user testing. But yeah, that's kind of what's behind our success.
Hmm. Hmm. And so like diving in kind of to like how Zeppelin's been able to help you specifically, I'd love to, touch on that. It looks like your team uses, we've checked it out, uses tags and sections extensively.
Mhm.
Can you walk us through like your team's thought process with that? I know we have like a decent amount of Zeppelin users saying hi in the chat, so I'm sure they'd love to hear about that.
Sure. I actually have two different samples here because these are two different products with two different product owners. And what we'll do is the designers will typically, publish our screens. We will set up the organization, we'll set up the sections, we'll set up the subsections. Sometimes we will use the tag groups, but what we find is that we're empowering our product owners to use Zeppelin in a way that makes sense to them. And from that, we get best practices. So it goes from, hey, this is a UX tool, use it, to, hey, this is our tool. How can we all use it in the best way possible? It's also great for onboarding new employees. We use it all the time for that.
Hmm. And I would imagine, at such a large org like that, this kind of efficiency, like at scale, it starts to matter a lot more, right? When you have a small design team, maybe the friction isn't as noticeable, but when you start growing and you're onboarding more and more, like that friction becomes a lot more apparent.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about the developers. We want all of our designers to love our developers and Q&A and all the other stakeholders. So I know like annotations is something that you use heavily in Zeppelin. Since the app has a lot of functionality like store locator, purchase, order tracking, checkout. Can you walk us through like what types of things you're using for annotation with annotations and why it's been helpful for your devs to do it this way?
Sure. We definitely use requirements. We'll make some notes on our side about what some of the requirements are, but This is actually something, a sample that I can't even take credit for because this is something that our product owner came up with, and we started using this as a best practice. But he uses his annotations for things like API calls or Firebase events.
Hmm.
So in the past, this kind of thing would have been documented somewhere else, but it just made sense to pull this kind of information into Zeplin where developers are looking at this, they're looking at the code snippets, they're looking at the screens anyway. So it just makes
Hmm.
sense to have that kind of information right there.
Yeah, like right on the design. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So talking a little more, about that, tailoring documentation for devs and QA. Can you talk about a little bit about flows, and like uh kind of like a walkthrough of how they create like a high level UX view that you're looking for?
Yeah. Again, flows is another thing that we use quite frequently. I really like it. Again, it keeps everything in one place. And how I typically use flows is I like to have screens either designed or at least in a wireframe state. That way I can start putting a flow together and visualizing that flow. And then what I'll do is I'll use that little placeholder screen over on the bottom right-hand side as kind of my to-do list. So I know there needs to be a screen for it. I just haven't designed it yet. Let me put a placeholder for it. The other nice thing about that, besides it becoming my to-do list of things that I have to design next, but it also indicates to our developers that, hey, I have thought about it. I just
Mhm.
haven't don't have a design for it. So maybe you work on like a sign up flow and while I'm finishing a payment flow type of thing.
Right. It also gives them visibility more into like your thought process as well. And like that never like goes unnoticed, I think, when you're talking about like clear communication between teams and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So kind of driving it home, I guess if we could give like a one sentence summary of how your team uses Zeppelin and like a UX workflow, it's like Zeppelin is probably quote unquote your single source of product truth for like your entire Little Caesars like design organization. Would that be fair to say?
Everything, if it like went down, we would be lost. So this is where we have simple UX visibility, and then just reducing the amount of back and forth messages. Because I remember in the past, before we had Zeppelin, if I have 15 developers working on something and they need an icon or they need a logo, that's 15 people emailing me throughout the day, just
Right.
asking for an asset. So it's super helpful and super nice to have, it in one place where it can be downloaded. And that's been helpful for not only our, internal teams, but when we're working with contract teams as well.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think like cutting down on like a lot of back and forth is like a huge thing that we've always prided ourselves here at Zeppelin. I think like, like you mentioned, when you have 15 people going back and forth, they're probably also going back and forth with other people on your team as well. That can get messy real quick. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. Okay, so I guess now we can get into Q&A. I actually wanted to ask everyone in the chat because I have a surprise for everyone if they give me just like 1 or 2 minutes to go grab it. But I do want to know if you're in the chat what your favorite pizza topping is. And I know Nico asked this as well, but I'm also curious to hear about the pineapple debate because I feel like pineapple gets like a bad rep. Um, people say like it doesn't belong on pizza. I feel like that's kind of extreme. Kind of hurts me, but I'll be right back. Give me 1 sec. Um, yeah, Erica, I know, do you have a favorite pizza topping? I just wanted to ask because I know you're like a pizza expert compared to the rest of us.
I am team pepperoni or
Okay.
team pineapple all the way, by the way.
Okay.
I do think it belongs, but I will say my favorite pizza, which Little Caesars doesn't have yet, I'm still lobbying for it, is a dill pickle pizza. I probably just grossed everybody out by that. Yeah. Dill pickle pizza, yeah, I love it. Oh, some people are with me. I can see it.
I got the the crazy puffs too. I'm excited to try
Oh, you
these.
did.
Yeah, right here.
Those just came out in the US this week.
Oh, really? All right,
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited. So Erica coined this new term. We were gonna call it Q&A, but now that I'm gonna be eating pizza throughout this, we're calling it Chew&A. So again, if you had any questions, please take a look in the Q&A section. If there's a question that you don't see there that you like answered, please let us know. And for anyone again who couldn't see, I've got the best pizza in the world right here, Little Caesars. You get like a little ASMR mukbang with your webinar. That's how we do it here at Zeppelin. So we'll start with the first question. How do you leverage accessibility in the website and app?
Oh, good question. We actually partner with an outside agency that does an audit for us. So we went through that probably a couple years ago and making sure that we were ADA compliant every way. It also made us kind of look at how Pizza Portal is done as well and kind of the experience around that. So if you ever order through the Pizza Portal the first time, you get this message asking if you have any reach restrictions. And at first, people were like, why are you asking that? That's kind of a weird question, but it actually makes sense once we added a little bit more information around it and told customers why we were asking it. But it really means that if you're coming into the store and you're picking up your pizza and you can't reach, or you might be in a wheelchair, we're making sure that we are putting your order in a portal compartment that is accessible to you.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, before the next question, I'm gonna try it. I got the crazy puff. Everybody see that? Can you describe like what this is? Is this like a mini pizza?
I call it a pizza cupcake.
Okay.
That's what it's like to me.
That's gas. That's fire. Okay. Sorry. I hope no one's jealous. This is so delicious. I haven't eaten anything all day. Um, so question about the pizza portal.
Mhm.
Sorry. Was a pizza portal something you saw similarly in a different market and wanted to implement? Or how did the pizza portal idea come about?
You know what? I probably can't answer that because it was something that was already developed and being worked on when I arrived here. So it
Mm,
was definitely, not my idea. I didn't have anything to do with
mhm.
that. I just was working on the screens to make sure that the app and the website worked with the pizza portal.
Right. Okay. So that was like kind of an earlier idea. That's
Yeah.
interesting because I feel like it's like similar to like kind of, if I've seen it like some newer malls, they have like those food pickup boxes outside the malls for like the food court stuff. But that's relatively new. So it's interesting that Little Caesars was on that so early. I mean, even like before 6 years ago, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you involve other designers in the approval process or do you do more informal critiques? Like, I guess what is like the approval process like?
Oh, kind of like if we like shop it around between the designers and kind of like take a look at it between like the two or three of us first before
Mhm,
we do that. Yeah, we kind of
mhm,
bounce ideas off of each other. Even though I'm the lead, I'm always bouncing it off my senior designer as well, saying, hey, what do you think about this? Our senior designer actually comes from the marketing department,
hmm,
so she knows the brand really well. She knows design standards and everything like that. So sometimes instead of going directly to the marketing department, I will check in with her before I take it to the marketing department just to make sure everything is kind of like on the up and up and they won't reject anything.
mhm. Gotcha. Gotcha. So David Warren asks, they say we're building an e-commerce app. What are some of the most impactful guidelines that your team follows when building like an e-commerce app?
I think that's the great thing with Baymart guidelines is they've already done the research on that with like tens of thousands of different sites. Because when you have e-commerce, I mean, if you've ever purchased anything online, you know this yourself as a user, you have kind of like a certain set of expectations of how things work on an e-commerce site. You have certain expectations how a checkout flow will go, where to find your order history, and that kind of thing. So I think that has been really helpful to guiding how we do certain things.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Question about like kind of the design tooling. What's the benefit of using flows in Zeppelin? I know you touched on this, but I guess like a little more about like the benefits that provides versus say like a prototype in Figma. Would you use both in like your workflow?
We still use prototypes a lot of times, especially because we'll use types to do some, testing before something goes into development to make sure things, make sense to users. But I will say, I recently was working with an external group for some development, and they had brought me a bunch of flows in Miro, which I'm familiar with Miro. I use that as well for like, brainstorming. But
Hmm.
they had their flows in Miro, which works, but it made so much more sense to have flows in Zeppelin where they could see the actual screens and it was not just, a box and an arrow.
Right. Right.
They're in it already, so why not just use it?
Right. And I think that's like a big thing, when you're talking about also just having like how your product owner, and there's a question related to this too that I'll get to in a second, but like having like the annotations there, I think just having like all of that visibility in like a locked screen, I think is like kind of something that's very valuable for a lot of teams when you think about like getting all the information in one place,
Mhm.
in an area where everyone knows how to operate out of instead of having to go from like different areas and trying to find like source information from Figma and Miro, et cetera, and other documentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Before I get to the next question, I'm gonna eat everyone's either least favorite or most favorite pizza with pineapple on top. Oh, I just lost some ham, but it's okay. Hawaiian, classic. Um, how did you, let me see. This question came. Oh yeah. So how did you empower product owners to really take ownership in Zeppelin? I feel like product fatigue is real. And this kind of touches, I guess, again on like how you had like a product owner's idea to use annotations for like API calls and stuff like that.
It happened really organically. Again, like I said, I can't take credit for it. We've had Zeppelin around since pretty much by the time I started, because that was probably one of the first tools that I brought in to help us with our workflow. And so, it's taken a while for the developers to get used to using Zeppelin. They're all on board now. They're all very familiar with it. And, just when you talk about empowering the product owners to use it, it can start with conversations like, hey, does this make sense to you? Because they're working with the developers more one-on-one and more frequently with their sprint planning and stuff like that. So, it's just, how can we make this better? How can we make this better for the developers? What would you suggest? And yeah, that just kind of led to the use of the annotations in a certain way. Another product owner that we have just recently did a whole new tagging kind of like organization. So she's got things set up with tagging that has like, guest flow versus a logged in flow. So we can tag screens as like, say, hey, this is a guest screen and this is a logged in screen. So it just makes sense to that team. And all of a sudden it becomes like, hey, we love that idea. This is how we're going to use it. This is how
Mhm.
everybody's going to use it. So we'll start
Right.
setting up new projects that way.
Yeah. That's awesome. Very democratic. It's a big democracy, I guess, like when you're talking about sourcing like best practices and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of dancing around with these questions here. They're going back, just one more on like kind of touching on like Zeppelin and design readiness. So aside from like the flows that you mentioned, would other screens in Zeppelin for your workflow be considered final and development ready? If not, how do you handle communicating readiness?
Not always. So we'll either handle it one of two ways. We'll either use the tagging to indicate whether something has been approved or not. There's also that approval thing. If you see something is approved, then obviously you can go ahead and start developing it. But we also kind of organize another Zeppelin project where we keep it as like just concepts. It's something
Mhm.
that we are designing. We haven't got approval for it. In fact, somebody probably didn't even ask us to do it.
Hmm.
And then we just keep kind of like our separate, and then only certain people can be invited to that. That way it doesn't, get out there in the wild and people start seeing that and, having, panic attacks because they think we're changing a bunch of things up. But
Hmm.
those are the three, four-ish different ways that we handle that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And so there's a few questions here kind of about how you mentioned data. So this question is like, I love how you mentioned data, you let data lead the way. How much slash what kind of user testing are you able to do before building out new features or ideas in a real way?
Let's see if I can answer this well. So I did mention that we have a UX analyst on our team, and that person is usually responsible for telling us like the what. So we have a good idea of what is happening. However, to get to the why, we rely heavily on user testing and just human insights.
Hmm.
So we do a lot of discovery type unmoderated test. I think that was a question whether we had some kind of like internal lab or field
Right.
research, but
Right. Yeah.
we typically do unmoderated testing. And then our pool of participants is usually pretty specific. They align with our typical users, and we can get
Mhm.
that from user testing. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, especially I feel like, when you're such like a consumer-based business and you're like trying to go like push forward like the boundaries of like what like your stores does, whether it's like with the pizza portal and stuff like that, or like becoming one of the earlier adopters of like a digital experience, it's like difficult, not always easy to do like just direct user testing if they don't know like what the options are.
Mhm.
Yeah. This is an interesting question. So when you're again talking about the pizza portal, did you work directly with industrial designers on the pizza portal experience?
No, I did
Okay.
not.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Let's see. And then, this is touching on like kind of recruiting, like what kind of designers do you recruit during the recruitment process? Talking about, I guess, general skills, geographical location, remote, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, ever since we were told to work from home, our team never came back. Well, a little bit, a little bit. We mostly work remote, hybrid. All of us are based in Detroit because there are instances where we do need to come into the office every once in a while for things, for meetings, for events, and that kind of thing. Our contract designers, those ones can be remote. We really don't care where you're working. Um, and the types of designers that we look for as far as recruiting I'm just looking for, a portfolio of a good thought process. We also try to, because we're a small team, we also make sure that we are typically like a T-shaped specialist. So while one of us may have a really deep understanding right here
Mhm.
of UI design and graphic design and typography and everything like that, but then they'll have like a broad knowledge of testing, of research, and that kind of thing. And that's how we all kind of work together because we all have our specialties. So, somebody that I might be looking at next would be someone that complements the rest of the team in a deep knowledge of a skill that we might be lacking or have a weakness in.
Right, right. And I guess this is another one more related recruiting question. I guess what skills to you as a designer distinguish from like junior, mid, senior, lead levels when you're thinking about like I guess like the career development of a designer?
Really, it's really simple, actually. Do you need to be mentored or can you take the lead on things on your own without having to be told what to do? That's it.
Gotcha, gotcha. Before I get to a few more, I've got the classic, everyone's favorite, pepperoni. So one question about kind of back to like Zeppelin and like how you collaborate as like a cross-functional UX team. Is marketing involved in Zeppelin or how else do you cross collaborate with other
Not
teams?
Yeah, not, I mean, Marketing isn't as heavily involved with Zeppelin as we are. However, we can share Zeppelin screens. We have members set up in Zeppelin as like reviewers. And if we're looking for like if we're looking for an approval or we want to show a flow, we'll do it that way. And a lot of times because they're not as familiar with Zeppelin, it's not going to just be a like, hey, here's the web URL link, take a look at
Mhm.
it and approve it. It's,
Right.
hey, let's schedule a meeting. We'll go through this. We'll show
Mhm.
it to you while it's in Zeppelin and then, get your feedback that way. And then if they come up with comments or anything like that, I'll typically use the comments as
Mhm.
like, I'll just type them in as they're talking about it. And then again, that becomes my to-do list to make changes to things or
Right.
iterate on things. And again, tagging is really great for that. I've learned that I can tag things as like question
Mhm.
or not. So then the
Yeah.
next meeting that I bring up, I can just, tap on everything that's tagged with a question, a change, a comment, or something like that. So that's really helpful as well.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And then like diving in more to like the handoff process. This question is kind of around developers. So how do you do the designs handoff for the developers to get like the code extract, I guess, that they need off the designs?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So every different development team usually has a different type of code that they're looking for. So some of the developers might be working in Flutter, for example, and we make sure our code snippets are set to Flutter. We'll typically, pass off those designs, we'll publish them in Zeppelin, and then we have our user stories, which are created in our cards or our DevOps or Jira, if anybody's using that. The nice thing about Zeppelin as well is it also integrates with Azure DevOps. So if there's a specific card saying, hey, do this change, like remove this field on this form, we'll do that, and then we'll link right in Azure DevOps to Zeppelin, and you can see the little thumbnail. So in the past, we would just add the link in there, but it's really nice. You can see the little thumbnail in there now.
Hmm. Gotcha. So we've got another question about kind of like the pizza portal design process. So what was the most surprising problem that came out of that? Did it feel like a paint by numbers e-commerce project, or were there any wrinkles?
Um, it was such a while ago that
Hmm.
I'm not thinking of any like wrinkles that came out of it. Um, really, no.
Hmm.
I can honestly say that. I will say that a lot of the feedback that we got from the actual pizza portal and that process has been really positive.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I'm gonna give you one last question. Then I'll let
Sure.
everyone go. I know you have pizza to get back to. I have pizza that I want to continue eating without being so polite on camera. So, if you could rename the UX discipline, what would you name it and why?
Oh, professional pizza people watching. I don't know. I'm a professional. I'm a professional people watcher. That's what I do. Again,
Mhm.
I pride myself on listening to people and observing people. So yeah, professional people
Yeah,
watching is
I
what we
think
do.
yeah, that's pretty insightful. I mean, as a UX designer, like that's kind of like, like you mentioned, Little Caesars, like it's all about the customer, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, again, this recording will be emailed to everyone. For the questions we weren't able to get to, I'll follow up with Erica and get answers, and I'll follow up with you directly over email. If you're interested in staying connected with us, I'm gonna put our LinkedIn links in the chat. Just don't smash my pizza when I'm typing. And if you're interested in keeping up with Zeppelin and the events we do here, I'm also gonna drop that link in the chat. Lastly, Zeppelin is offering a pricing discount through March. I know dev mode pricing has been a little spicy, so you can check that out on our homepage under the pricing tab. And I guess that's it. Thank you so much, Erica, for taking the time to be here. Really appreciate it. I hope you had fun. I'm gonna wolf down all this pizza. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.